Hey guys, tonight we're stepping right into the middle of a medieval town, cobblestones underfoot. Crooked timber houses looming overhead, and an air so thick with smoke rot. And unwashed bodies that your nostrils practically wave a white flag. You're here for less than a day, but I have bad news. You probably won't survive this. The sights might charm you from a distance, but once you're in, it's smelling it, hearing it. Feeling the press of the crowd, you'll realize quickly why this era is not a romantic postcard. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and your local time. My love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you step through the creaking wooden gate is that the road is not paved, it's a narrow, rutted strip of dirt and crushed oyster shells, with puddles that aren't just rainwater. The street doubles as an open sewer, and every so often someone leans out a window to empty a bucket of, well, let's just say you learn to sidestep quickly. You pull your cloak tighter, not for warmth, but to protect your clothes from whatever might splash. A man with no teeth offers to sell you a fresh fish, which is odd because you're about 20 miles from the sea. It smells like the fish made the trip here on foot. You catch sight of a pig rooting in the muck, followed by a few chickens chasing after something you really hope is edible. In many towns, livestock roam free, cleaning up food scraps or leaving new ones behind. You try to find clean footing, but that's a relative concept here. The cobblestones where they exist are slick with a mix of mud, dung, and straw. Historians still argue whether medieval streets were as filthy as some chroniclers described. But let's be honest, even at their cleanest, they wouldn't pass a modern city's hygiene inspection. The smell comes in layers: smoke from hearths, tannery chemicals, stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of animal waste. And then, from somewhere, the faint scent of bread, baking just enough to tease you before it's swallowed by the rest. You try to move with the crowd, but there's no personal space. People bump against you, constantly traders with baskets. Women carrying jugs, a man lugging what you think is a sheep carcass. The press of bodies feels warm, damp, and claustrophobic. And you realize there's no such thing as a quiet corner here. Every street is a tangle of voices, hammering, clanging, dogs barking, the occasional ominous church bell tolling in the distance. You pass the town stocks, currently occupied by a man whose crime might have been theft, or maybe just being in the wrong place when someone important got angry. A few children throw bits of vegetable at him, giggling. It's entertainment, and nobody seems to question it. At one corner, you're nearly bowled over by a cart pulled by a single, tired horse. The cart's wheels cut deep into the mud, splashing your legs. The driver yells something at you, probably move. And you quickly comply, stepping back into the doorway of a small shop. The shopkeeper eyes you suspiciously, as if you might steal something. You'd like to reassure them, but your modern clothes, or even your attempt at blending in, mark you as an outsider instantly. In this world, outsiders are curiosities at best and scapegoats at worst. You start to feel a subtle burn in your throat from the air. The constant smoke from open fires and poorly ventilated chimneys settles into your lungs. People here are used to it. You, however, feel like you're trying to breathe through a wool scarf soaked in vinegar. And then there's the marketer crush of stalls, shouting vendors, and the smell of salted meat, spices, and occasionally something that's gone well past its sell-by date. You try to keep your coins tucked away. Flashing money here is like flashing a neon sign that says, "Rob me, I'm new." The locals are adept at spotting the unfamiliar, and your soft hands and confused glances make you stand out even more. This is just the beginning. You've barely made it down one main street, and already your senses are overloaded. The day hasn't even truly begun, and you're starting to realize that lasting 24 hours here might be optimistic. By the time you reach the town square with its haphazard stalls, gossiping townsfolk, and the ever-present watchful eyes of both the church and the local lordsmen, you're already searching for a way out, or at least for somewhere to sit that docen. Tea involves sharing space with a chicken. Your stomach growls, which is unfortunate, because nothing in this town looks or smells remotely like the breakfast you're used to. You follow the crowd toward the market stalls, hoping to find something fresh. Instead, you're greeted by a bubbling cauldron of, well, it's called pottage. Imagine a soup that's been reheated for days, with whatever ingredients happen to be lying around tossed in. Cabbage leaves, barley, a few carrot ends, maybe a suspicious sliver of meat that looks like it's been through a few reincarnations already. The vendor ladles some into a wooden bowl, and you catch a whiff earthy sour and smoky, with an undertone that could be mutton, or maybe just the cauldron itself. You try to convince yourself it's edible. This is breakfast, medieval style. The thing about pottage is that it's never really made fresh. It's kept simmering day after day, with new scraps added as they become available. Historians still argue whether this actually made it safer to eat or just turned it into a slow-moving health hazard. You blow on the steaming surface, watching bits of grain and limp greens swirl. The texture is lumpy, somewhere between oatmeal and wet bread. And because bread here is a luxury for most people, you get a rough, dense slice made from rye and whatever filler the miller happened to have. Sometimes sawdust, if grain was short. The loaf is hard enough to serve as a blunt weapon, so you tear at it slowly, soaking pieces in the pottage until they're soft enough to chew. Around you, others are tucking in without complaint. A mother spoons the stew into her child's mouth while chatting about the weather. An old man gnaws at a bone that might once have belonged to a chicken, smiling as if it's a feast. You're reminded that for many, this is a decent morning meal, better than the alternative, which might be nothing at all. Then you spot a jug of ale being passed around, even though the sun is barely up. This isn't a wild party habit. Water isn't always safe to drink. Brewing ale weak, cloudy, and barely alcoholic kills off some of the nastier microbes, making it a safer bet. You take a cautious sip, and it tastes like liquid bread with a faint tang. Not terrible, but definitely a far cry from your morning coffee. And forget about coffee or tea, they won't arrive in Europe for centuries. Your caffeine cravings will have to suffer. As you eat, you notice something moving along the edge of the table. At first you think it's a stray crumb falling, but then you realize it's a flea, and another, and possibly a louse on the shoulder of the man sitting across from you. Hygiene standards are different here. Washing hands before eating is rare, and even the wealthy can't avoid the tiny hitchhikers that come with living in close quarters. You try not to think about it, but the itch between your shoulder blades grows suspiciously more noticeable. A boy approaches, offering you a fresh egg for a few coins. The shell is faintly cracked, and you're not convinced it's recent. Still, you buy it out of politeness, and he beams at the sale before darting off. You decide to tuck it away, rather than risk adding food poisoning to your medieval bucket list. Breakfast is not a leisurely affair. People eat quickly, often standing, then scatter to whatever work awaits them. The vendor scrapes the sides of the cauldron, tossing in a handful of dried beans for the next meal. You realize you've just experienced one of the better options if you were poorer. You might be starting your day with nothing but a crust of stale bread and some thin onion broth. You also notice the absence of something: sugar. Sweetness here comes from honey, which is precious and rare, especially for common folk. So if you were imagining some comforting pastry to soften your morning, forget it. Medieval mornings are about fuel, not indulgence. As you step away from the stall, your stomach is full enough, but not in a way that feels entirely safe. You try to push down the creeping thought that your body, pampered by modern refrigeration and sanitation, may not be ready for this culinary adventure. And the day is just getting started. Soon, you'll learn that whatever energy you've managed to scrape together will be burned off quickly. Because your modern idea of work is about to be rewritten entirely. The warmth from that questionable breakfast fades quickly as you re-herded toward the town's edge by a group of locals. They aren't unfriendly, but there's a clear expectation you're here. You look able-bodied, and that means you're going to work. There's no such thing as just visiting in a medieval town. Everyone has a role, and idleness is a luxury reserved for no one but the sick or the noble. A woman with a voice like gravel thrusts a bundle of clothing into your arms. You unfold it to find, well, it's technically clothing, a tunic made of coarse wool woven in a way that feels more like wearing a doormat than fabric. Underneath, a linen shirt slightly softer, but still rough enough to make your skin complain. There's a faint, unmistakable smell of sheep, and not entirely sure whether it's the wool itself or the fact that the last person who wore this had been sharing space with livestock. You try to slip it on, but immediately feel a seam rubbing against the inside of your arm like sandpaper. Medieval fabrics aren't pre-shrunk, softened, or lined with modern comforts. They itch, they scratch, and in winter they're damp more often than they're warm. As you adjust the tunic, you feel something tickle at your wrist. You glance down and there it is, your first confirmed medieval houseguest, a louse. Moving with the confidence of someone who's not about to be evicted. You brush it off, shuddering. The woman sees you and laughs, explaining that everyone has them, even the king. It's a matter of how many, not if. In fact, one quirky tidbit historians note is that noblewomen sometimes kept lice combs as prized possessions, fancy ones carved from ivory because delousing was a daily reality. Your new footwear consists of thin leather shoes, soft enough to fold in half, but with no arch support and already damp from some unknown source. The ground beneath your feet offers no mercy. Mud, stones, and splinters are all fair game. Your socks, if you can call them that, are strips of wool wrapped around your feet and tied at the ankles. They keep you warm, sort of, but also bunch up and rub blisters into your skin. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly dirtier than their modern stereotype, since public bathhouses existed in some places. But here in this town, baths are rare, and most people go weeks without washing their clothes. Linen undergarments help absorb sweat, but when those are washed infrequently, the smell becomes its own weather system. A neighbor offers you a belt made from a length of rope. You tie it around your waist, feeling like you've stepped into a community theater production of Peasant No. 3. But for them, this is daily life. And once you're dressed like them, you stop being just a strange outsider. You start blending in, at least until you open your mouth. You notice that the colors are muted natural browns, grays, and off-whites. Bright dyes exist, but they're expensive and reserved for special occasions or wealthy wardrobes. You can't help but feel how heavy everything is. The layers weigh you down, trapping both body heat and every stray smell you've encountered since breakfast. And given the constant smoke in the air, that scent will cling to you until you find a rare moment to change. As you pull the tunic straight, the gravel-voiced woman nods approvingly and gestures toward a group hauling baskets. You're expected to join them. You glance down at your new outfit and realize these clothes are meant to look nice. They meant to survive being dragged through mud, snagged on brambles, and splattered with whatever your work throws at you. Fashion here, ISNT, a choice at S armor against a world that's constantly rubbing back. And as you take your first steps toward the fields, every seam, every itch, and every tiny crawling reminder on your skin whispers the same truth. You're no longer just visiting. You're living uncomfortably in medieval time. The road to the fields winds past the town's water source, a shallow, sluggish stream with a film of green drifting along its surface. A couple of women are kneeling at the bank, scrubbing laundry in the same water that a few feet upstream is being used by a man to wash his horse. Upstream from that, a child tosses in a bucket of something you don't dare identify. You suddenly understand why the ale at breakfast was the safer option. It doesn't take long for the truth to hit you here. Disease isn't a rare misfortune, it's a constant shadow. Every surface, every sip, every handshake could be the start of something nasty. You see a man coughing violently into his sleeve, spitting on the ground, and going right back to handling the bread he's selling. Nobody around him even flinches. It's just another Tuesday. Historians still argue whether medieval people knew much about disease transmission, didn't understand germs in the modern sense. But they were well aware that sickness spread, and they blamed everything from bad air to sinful living. The problem was that the solutions were often as dangerous as the illness itself. As you pass a side street, you spot a woman wearing a pouch of dried herbs tied around her neck. She tells you it's to ward off the plague. The scent is strong, rosemary, sage, maybe lavender, but the confidence in her eyes is stronger. In a world where medicine is primitive, belief itself can feel like protection. It's the most unsettling part. There's no sick leave. If you can stand, you work. Fever or not, the fields still need tending, the bread still needs baking, and in cramped houses where whole families sleep in a single room, disease doesn't politely stop at one person. It sweeps through everyone like a wildfire. You pass a boy with a rash along his jawline, scratching idly as he helps his father stack firewood. His mother notices your worried glance and shrugs its Probably nothing, she says. But in a time without antibiotics, probably nothing can turn into probably fatal within a week. You can't shake the feeling that your body, raised in a world of vaccines and sterile packaging, is like a naive tourist in a war zone. Even the animals carry their own hazards. Cats and dogs here aren't the pampered pets, you know. They're semi-wild, sometimes flea-ridden, and always on the hunt for scraps. And then there's the constant background illnesses that everyone just lives with. Coughs that never quite go away. Teeth rotting slowly in the jaw, aching joints from infections that would be treatable today. The townsfolk push through it because they have no choice, and that resilience is admirable. But it's also chilling. You'll realize that if you were to catch something here, anything from dysentery to a chest infection, DB relying on remedies that range from mildly helpful to definitely harmful. Leeching, herbal poultices, and the ever-popular advice to pray harder aren't exactly the kind of medical plan you re-used to. A sudden gust carries the scent of smoke, and you see a distant pyre where a bundle of old rags is burning. Someone tells you it's clothing from a plague victim, destroyed to keep the sickness from spreading. It's a small comfort, but you're starting to understand that here. You survive not because danger isn't there, but because you've learned to walk beside it every day. The fields stretch out beyond the last crooked row of houses, a patchwork of greens and browns under the pale morning sky. You've barely stepped onto the dirt path when someone shoves a wooden rake into your hands and points to a strip of land. You're about to discover that work here is not just a way to make a living, it's a full-contact sport. Your assigned task sounds simple enough: clear stones from a plot so it can be plowed. But these aren't neat palm-sized pebbles, they're jagged chunks of Earth's oldest bones, embedded like stubborn teeth. You bend, pull, and immediately feel your lower back lodge a formal complaint. The ground is uneven, your shoes are thin, and the damp soil sucks at your feet like it's trying to claim them. A man beside you hums a tune while hefting rocks twice the size of your head. His arms are roped with muscle from a lifetime of this, and he works with the rhythm of someone who knows he'll be here until sunset. There's no hourly wage. Your payment is food, a roof, and the vague promise that you'll still be in the good graces of whoever owns this land. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants worked longer hours than we do today, but what's certain is that the labor was far more physically punishing. You don't clock in and out to rise with the sun, work until it sets, and use the in-between hours to tend your own tiny plot, repair your tools, or barter at the market. By midday, your hands are blistered despite the callous-free optimism you started with. You're sweaty, itchy from the wool rubbing your neck, and the sun has turned your shoulders into slow-roasting cuts of meat. Someone hands you a drink ale again, since water is a gamblend, a chunk of hard cheese with a heel of bread. You chew slowly, grateful for the break, even as you notice the bread is flecked with what looks suspiciously like grain weevils. Nobody else bats an eye. They're just extra protein. One quirky fact. In some regions, peasants were required by law to use the Lord's mill to grind grain, paying in both coin and a portion of flour. Even the act of making bread could be a debt trap. The man beside you laughs when you mention this, telling you in a low voice that some folks sneak their grinding by night to avoid the tax. If they're caught, the punishment is harsh loss of goods, fines, or worse. The afternoon brings more work, this time loading hay onto a cart. Your arms tremble under the weight, and every sneeze reminds you that medieval hay is full of dust, bugs, and bits of whatever the wind decided to carry in. The horses snort impatiently, swishing their tails against clouds of flies that seem determined to join you for the rest of the day. As the light begins to fade, you're aching in places you didn't know you had. Your muscles protest every movement, and your fingers are stiff from gripping tools with no ergonomic design. The locals seem tired too, but theirs is the quiet fatigue of people who've done this all their lives. Your exhaustion, in contrast, feels like a warning that you won't last long here. You trudge back toward the town, clutching the rake like it's the only thing keeping you upright. The gravel-voiced woman from earlier nods at you with something like approval. You've survived the day's labor. Barely. But your modern desk job body is already sending up flares. And you still have the evening to get through, an evening where the law itself might turn against you if you're not careful. The sun dips low, painting the timbered buildings in bands of gold and shadow. And you're looking forward to collapsing somewhere or anywhere when you hear shouting from the town square. It's not celebration, It's the kind of shouting that makes people pause mid-step and glance over their shoulders before deciding whether to watch. You follow the pull of the crowd and arrive to find a man kneeling in the stocks, his wrists and neck locked in place by thick wooden boards. His hair is matted with something unpleasant, likely the contributions of passers-by, and his face is a mix of anger and humiliation. A group of children, emboldened by the adults watching, hurl rotting vegetables at him. You can feel the wet splatter on your own cheek just from standing nearby. Nobody seems shocked. Justice here is swift, public, and often spectacular. You ask someone what the man did, and the answer changes depending on who you talk to. One says he stole bread. Another insists he insulted the Lord's steward. A third claims it was witchcraft. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was more about actual guilt or simply keeping people afraid enough to obey. As you try to slip away, you bump into a man in a leather jerkin part of the town. Watch. His eyes narrow. Ask your name, your business, and where you're lodging. You hesitate for just a beat too long, and he steps closer. In this place, hesitation can be read as guilt. A neighbor jumps in, vouching for you, and the watchman loses interest for now. But you've been marked. I'm in a town this size. Being a stranger without a clear role makes you a walking target for suspicion. You can feel it in the glances that follow you as you walk. You pass the pillory, an even more immobilizing version of the stock sand. Hear talk of tomorrow's hanging. The condemned is accused of poaching deer from the Lord's forest. You're about to joke that where you come from, that's just dinner, but you bite your tongue. Here the forest belongs to someone, and taking from it without permission is theft punishable by death. One quirky legal tidbit you overhear: in some places, swearing false oaths could earn you a public tongue piercing with a red-hot iron. And if you thought trial by jury meant a fair hearing, forget it. Trials here often involve oath helpers, people who swear you're honest, regardless of actual evidence. If you can't convince enough people to stand for you, your case is already lost. The mood in the square shifts when a hooded figure is dragged forward, hands bound. The crowd murmurs. Some avert their eyes. Others lean in, eager for the drama. You don't catch the charges. But the watchman's voice is clear. By the will of the Lord, punishment will be carried out. The sentence is to spend the night chained to the square post, to open invitation for anyone with a grudge to hurl insults or worse. You retreat, keeping your head down, realizing how fragile your position is. In a world where the law bends toward whoever holds power, single accusation could end your stay very abruptly and very permanently. And as darkness gathers, you begin to understand why the real danger is only just beginning. The evening bells begin to toll, their deep iron voices rolling through the air, and the mood of the town changes with them. Shops shutter, market stalls are packed away, and a tide of people drifts toward the church. Whether you want to join or not, you're swept along. Inside, the heavy scent of incense clings to the air like a physical weight. Candles flicker in the dimness, casting gold halos over painted saints and carved wooden beams. You find a place to stand along the wall. There are no pews here, just open space for the faithful to kneel on the hard floor. The service begins, not in the language you speak every day, but in Latin distant, almost mystical. The words wash over you, rhythmic and strange. A boy in a patched robe swings a censer, and the smoke makes your eyes water. People cross themselves, bow, whisper prayers. You stand still, trying not to stand out. In medieval life, religion is not just belief. It's the clock, the calendar, the law, and the glue that holds the community together. Bells mark not just worship, but the hours of the day. Fasts dictate what you can eat and when. Festivals decide when work pauses and when it intensifies. One quirky fact: in some regions, church bells were also believed to drive away storms, and priests would ring them during darkening skies to scare off lightning and evil spirits. Whether it worked or not, it was as much a part of life as planting crops or mending roofs. You notice how everyone participates, not necessarily with enthusiasm, but with the deep-rooted habit of people who've done this since birth. The church here is also the main source of charity, news, and even medical advice. Displease it, and you risk more than just gossip. You risk being cut off from the thin web of support that keeps people alive. Historians still argue whether the medieval church's dominance was a unifying force or a method of control. Standing here, it feels like both. You can see the comfort in the faces of those who murmur the prayers by heart, but also the wariness in the way they glance at the priest, as though watching for signs of judgment. After the service, people linger to talk. News is shared who's getting married, whose cow died, which distant village was struck by fever. You overhear an older woman insisting that the illness was punishment for breaking the fast. Others nod gravely. In a world without germ theory, sin is just as plausible a cause as bacteria. You're drawn to a carved wooden shrine in the corner. Its paint is faded, the figure's face worn smooth from countless hands, touching it for luck or healing. A boy brushes past you, pressing his lips to the wood before darting away, and you realize that faith here is not a Sunday hobby, it's woven into every gesture, every superstition, every hope for tomorrow. When you step back outside, the air is cooler, the light fading fast. The bells are silent now, but their echo lingers in your chest. Whether you're devout or not, you can't escape their pull here. The night is coming, and with it, a different kind of devotion, one to staying alive until morning. The last light drains from the sky, leaving the town in a gray-blue haze. Without street lamps, the streets turn into narrow corridors of shadow. The only light comes from a few flickering torches mounted on posts, their glow barely reaching the ground. Beyond that pure darkness, you hesitate at the edge of the square, realizing that once you step away from these torches, you're walking blind. The gravel-voiced woman from earlier passes by, carrying a basket, muttering that she needs to get home before the real trouble starts. You ask what she means, but she just smirks and says, "You'll see." You take a few steps down an alley, and the sounds change. In daylight, the air was full of hammering, talking, and animals. Now it's quieter, broken by the distant bark of a dog, the scurry of something small across the cobblestones, and somewhere footsteps that don't quite match your own pace. Here, nightfall means a shift in ownership of the streets. Market vendors are gone. The watch patrols are fewer and less inclined to risk themselves in the darker corners. Thieves, on the other hand, find their work much easier now. Keep one hand on your pouch of coins, but the truth is, if someone wants them, they'll take them. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly more dangerous at night than rural areas, but you can feel the tension without light. It's easy to get lost, even in familiar streets. The uneven ground catches at your feet, and the shadows turn every barrel or doorway into something that might be watching you. A sudden clatter makes you spin, just a stray cat tipping over a bucket. You laugh nervously, but your pulse doesn't slow. You remember that some towns had curfews, bells ringing to mark the hour when honest folk were expected indoors. Break that curfew without a good reason, and you could end up in the stocks or worse. You pass a shuttered tavern, the faint sound of laughter leaking through the walls. Inside, people are crammed together in the warmth, trading ale for news and gossip. Outside, the chill sets in, and the air smells faintly of smoke and damp wood. One quirky detail you overheard earlier: some households keep guard geese instead of dogs because they read louder and harder to bribe. You catch sight of one now, glaring at you from behind a fence, ready to shriek if you step too close. In the quiet of night, that honk could wake half the town and bring unwanted attention. The deeper you go, the more you feel like the darkness itself is a presence. Shapes shift in your peripheral vision, and you find yourself walking faster, shoulders hunched. Somewhere nearby, a group of men laugh, the sound sharp and mean. You take a different path, not wanting to find out what they find funny. By the time you reach your lodging, aloft above a stable, you're grateful just to be indoors. You pull the door shut and drop the wooden bar across it. Outside, the night continues without you, full of things you'd rather not see. Inside, it's warmer, but you know that warmth comes with its own risks. Because in the medieval world, safety is always relative. You wake the next morning to a strange, sour smell that instantly makes you question your decision to stay here. Something has gone off overnight, probably the hay in the loft or the animals in the stable below. You wrap your rough tunic tighter and step cautiously toward the main room, where a small pot simmers over the fire. A woman stirs it with a long wooden spoon, muttering prayers or curses. You're not entirely sure which. If you've managed to catch a cold from the night's chill, or worse, some lingering effect from yesterday's questionable pottage, this is when it would start to show. Medicine in medieval times is a blend of superstition, herbal knowledge, and sheer luck. A few leaves of sage, a poultice of honey, or an unlucky leech could mean the difference between recovery and a much shorter stay. Historians still argue whether some herbal remedies actually helped, or if survival was mostly due to the body's own resilience. You watch her drop a handful of dried herbs into the pot, then sniff it and nod. One fringe tidbit: some medieval cooks insisted on adding crushed beetles to soups for color or supposed health benefits. You breathe a quiet sigh of relief when she doesn't do that here. As you stir the pot, because survival requires participation, you realize that the medieval concept of medicine isn't tea just for the sick. Preventative measures are mostly about ritual, cleanliness where possible, and avoiding obvious dangers. Drinking ale instead of water, avoiding rats, wearing a protective charm. These are the survival tools for the common folk. The woman ladles some of the thick, grayish broth into a bowl and hands it to you.
Oh.
You sip cautiously. It's bland, earthy, and strangely satisfying because it's warm. Your stomach, still uneasy from the previous day's labor, accepts it gratefully. Outside, the sun is rising, but you know that by midday, you'll be back in the fields or hauling heavy wood again. The work never stops, and neither do the hazards. Ow. A man passes by with a bundle of herbs hanging from his belt. He tells you it's for the neighbor's child who's come down with something catchy. You peek at the child, red-faced, coughing, but still alive. You realize that life here is a constant negotiation with illness and injury. And if you misstep, your body, pampered by modern hygiene and medicine, will lose the negotiation. Walking outside, you see the familiar faces of the townsfolk already moving to their day's tasks. You notice a man carrying a steaming basket of bread, one hand swatting at flies, the other keeping the bread from tumbling. Another is sharpening a sickle with intense focus, knowing that a dull blade could mean more work, or worse, injury. You remember the ale at breakfast suite? Safe. And a small comfort and realize how many little things modern life takes for granted. And if the winter chill comes early, the relentless cruelty of the season will only amplify these dangers. Cold, hunger, and darkness are not just discomforts, they are active threats to survival. Food stores are small, clothing is inadequate, and firewood is precious. Sleep is often interrupted by the need to keep warm or guard against prowling animals and thieves. In this way, medieval medicine and labor intersect. You can't afford to rest, can't afford to ignore a wound, and can't afford to eat unsafe food. Each decision has weight, each step is a test. And every moment carries the subtle but unmistakable reminder. Surviving here is an achievement in itself. Winter descends slowly, wrapping the town in a gray, damp cloak. The wind whistles through gaps in the timber walls, making every door and shutter rattle like a warning. You wrap your coarse wool tunic tighter, but it's barely enough. Cold seeps in through your fingers, your toes, and even the small gaps between layers, reminding you that insulation wasn't exactly a priority in medieval design. Hunger joins the cold. Meager stores, you've gathered stale bread, a thin slab of cheese, a spoonful of leftover pottage, barely keep your energy up. In some regions, people literally lived on roots and cabbage for weeks at a time. You notice that the town seems quieter. Less hardy folk are staying indoors, hiding from the chill, and conserving what little warmth they have. You trudge to the water source, your breath forming small clouds. It coats the edges of the stream, and your fingers sting as you draw up the water. Drinking it is a gamble. Some sources are tainted with animal waste or runoff from nearby latrines, but you have no choice. You're reminded that what your modern self takes for granted, clean water, heated homes, reliable food, is a lifeline here. Outside, a group of children are playing near the frozen mud, laughter mixing with shouts. Their resilience is astounding, but you notice red noses, chapped hands, and the constant movement needed to stay warm. One child falls face first into a puddle of icy slush, gets up, shakes off, and runs again as if nothing happened. You marvel and shiver in equal measure. Medieval winters weren't just about the cold, they were about survival. Crops fail, livestock die, and the specter of famine looms large. Scholars still debate how communities coped with prolonged shortages, but you can see it in the rationed bread, the thin walls, the thick layers of clothing. Every day is a negotiation with nature, and every night you hope that the firewood lasts. Inside, you light a small lamp and huddle near it. The wind whines outside, carrying the distant howl of a dog or perhaps something larger. You feel the aches from yesterday's labor intensify, your muscles stiff from cold and overuse. Remember the day's work, the law's capricious threats, the hazards of illness, the biting insects, and the uncertainty that stretches endlessly before you. Survival is exhausting, relentless, and unglamorous. Still, as night deepens, you take a slow breath. You've seen the reality of medieval life, its raw, unfiltered toughness. You've glimpsed the ingenuity, the quirks, and the ways people adapted to a world without modern comforts. And while you hope you never have to spend another 24 hours here, you carry a new respect for the resilience it took to exist, day by day, in such a merciless landscape. Now, as the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavier, let's slow our pace. Imagine the cold and chaos of the medieval town gently fading, replaced by a quiet room, soft light pooling on the walls. You're no longer trudging through mud, no longer dodging livestock or dodging suspicion. Your body can finally relax, your mind letting go of the day's vivid trials. The smells of smoke, herbs, and unwashed bodies have lifted, leaving only the faint scent of your own blankets. Your muscles, once tense from labor and fear, sink into the mattress or chair beneath you. Hey world! Outside your window is still, calm, and dark. Even the echo of church bells or the distant barking of dogs is softened, muted by distance and night's embrace. Think of the townsfolk from earlier, the children playing in icy puddles. Alma, da. The neighbors hurrying home, imagine them slowly curling up in their warm homes. Alma. The work of the day behind them, the knowledge that survival tomorrow depends on this quiet moment of rest. You too are allowed. That exhale. Breathe deeply, slowly. Let the images of ragged streets, the weight of tunics, the harsh sun, and icy nights fade like clouds. Imagine yourself in a safer place, a modern room, where the air is clean, the water is clear, and warmth comes with ease. Smile quietly at the thought that these struggles, so vivid and real, are now just stories you've wandered through tonight. Let the story's edge soften. The dangers, the smells, the aches, they exist now only in memory, like shadows that fade at dawn. Your body and mind are ready to drift, safe in the knowledge that this is your resting place, not a cobbled alley, not a frostbitten field. And with that, you settle deeper. One last slow breath, one last glance at the medieval streets, now dim and distant. Your heartbeat slows, your mind quiets, and the gentle hum of night carries you softly, gently into sleep.